These past few days have been quite busy, full of work and stuff. Yesterday was Memorial Day, so I had to go into work for an extra day, Monday, and I worked it. I got about an extra hour of work in. It seems that around my job I'm becoming known for my ability to polish and clean up windows. And it is true that when things are a bit slow and I want some extra work, I'll go outside. I won't just clean the ones inside, but, maybe go a tad outside of my job description and go clean the outside windows because I get tired of looking at them being all grimy and pollinated the entire time. You can barely even see out of them, so it's like, well, no matter how much you clean the inside of the windows, they're still going to look dirty because the outside. So, you only remove the inside layer of the filth, but the outside one is the one that's really, really bad. So I've been doing that, and I received requests yesterday to polish the bathroom mirrors and the countertops, and apparently I did a really good job with that too, but it seems I'm becoming known for that. Which, even with the manager, so, it's something. But on top of that, I went ahead and swept off the walls of the outside of the building, including removing several forming wasps' nests. I took an especially long-handled broom and took care of that. Thankfully, they weren't too formed, but there were 2 or 3 of them. And they had about 2 to 3 wasps per. But, I figured better nip this in the bud right now before it grows into a problem. Because, these 2 or 3 wasps, they're going to realize this is a spot they can stay, and then they're going to go call their wasp buddies, their wasp sisters, and they're going to start constructing the actual nests, and then it's going to be an even bigger problem. So I took my broom, my surface cleaner spray, and a washcloth, and took care of those nests, knocked them down, destroyed the stems that attached them to the wall and to the ceiling, and those are gone now. Mix of motivations. I personally don't like wasps. I don't like being near wasps. So that was a relief to me to get rid of those. And I also realized that, customers aren't going to like having to walk in with the potential of wasps hiding around the corner. Getting a little, well, I can't say antsy, but waspy, about all these large two-legged folk getting too close to their newly formed wasps' nests, and then taking a problem with it, using those stingers they've got built in. But that shouldn't be a problem for at least a little while. But yeah, besides that, more irritating things with the other person, as usual. More just lying, fibbing, or exaggerating, or just completely saying nonsense about all kinds of things, including money, where money's being spent, where they're spending their time, all kinds of stuff. The other person even came up with this whole rigmarole, this whole story that led to the conclusion that they threatened, or heavily insinuated at least, that they were essentially going to use where I live, my current house, as a dumping ground for a family member. Essentially, all of a sudden just started going and make the house clean. This person, they're just gonna come live with you, and stuff like that. It was. I'm just gonna paraphrase it like that, but basically was just going to take a family member that I haven't seen in like over a decade now, and that, like, and just said, oh, I'm gonna just stick him in there to live with you. And I firmly just said, nobody can come to live here without my approval. If somebody wants to do that, make sure that they call me on the phone and I will talk to them. And we will have a discussion. But no one, that person cannot even come here, let alone live with me, unless I approve it. And if that is what they want, then make sure I get a phone call from them, and we will talk. And then all of a sudden, that whole narrative that suddenly popped up stopped getting talked about and brought up all of a sudden. But I know that with the other person, it's all feigned concern anyway. The other person really doesn't care. And it's not just me guessing, like literally just the other person being themselves. There's no actual emotion tied to it, and their intent is just to, if it is true at all, or if it's not just some heavily exaggerated tall tale, a fib, then the other person is just content to dump someone into my place and then leave it be. But then on top of that, the other person has, essentially no intention of supporting that person, if there is anything to support beyond just moving them somewhere else, dumping them off somewhere, and then heading off, essentially. Yeah. Oh, there's someone up ahead, so I'm gonna go quiet for just a second. Okay, anyway. So yeah, they're just gonna dump someone off, and pretty much after that just stopped talking about the person entirely. Showed no other concern beyond just, just stating very apathetically whatever was going on, and then saying that the person brought it upon themselves and all kinds of things. It's a thing, the other person will take whatever they can and try to turn it into essentially a thinly veiled version of how they view or what emotions they have towards you. It's a whole thing, but I won't go into it too deeply. But besides that, yeah, so that was the whole thing. I made it very clear, like, no, that needs entirely my approval first. And then the other person started going on about, well, I'll just have to find somewhere else to put you then, just moving the whole camper somewhere else. And then I was very clearly stated, like, whatever you find, make sure you send me the links so that I can compare and see price points as well. And then again, things kind of go quiet after that. It was just basically a long weekend of dealing with continuous, essentially, just like veiled threats, attempts at being dominant, all kinds of stuff. It was exhausting having to navigate through. And then there was what was the other one? Yeah, it was, so basically, when I checked through my finances, the money I'm making, it turns out that only so I get paid weekly, which means that in a month I get paid about like 4 paychecks. And then I realized, going through, that only 2 of my paychecks ever were getting deposited into the monthly rent. And what I came to realize is that my rent due on the 5th of every month was essentially eating up half of my total income every time the billing date came around. And so I looked at the calendar, did a reevaluation of, because I wasn't the one who originally set the billing date. It was the other person who had originally set the billing date. And so I looked at the calendar, I did a reevaluation, looked at the money I'm making, and realized that if I set the billing date to the 30th of the month, I would be able to actually have all 4 paychecks in on time for the rent consistently. Now, it would be $20 short, mind you, but that's better than being like over $400 short, because essentially every week I make about like $215, $217. And so in about 2 weeks, it's 400 something. But yeah, so every time the billing date for the rent would come around, it would eat up 400, and then the next 400 would just be sitting there waiting to get eaten up until I'm stuck in a cycle of only having half of the total money that I make. And then the other person, I was like, hey, I'm switching it to the 30th. And then they got on like this whole nonsensical rant about, like, I don't want to go over it right now all the way, but it just went on a whole nonsensical rant about like coming up with some circular logic about why their billing date has some kind of like mystical meaning behind it and is like ordained, and that it was a whole bunch of vagaries and stuff. And so I was just like, no, I already put in, oh, I didn't say no, I just said I already put in the word, it's going to be set to the 30th. So please make sure to prepare for that. And then almost immediately, like, relented on it, like instantly. Suddenly went from trying to be almost mythical and shaman-like in their explanation of the pricing to suddenly being like a scared child who was just like being hyperactively nervous. And the thing is about this is that before, the other person was actually the one who suggested pushing the billing date to sometime later anyway, and even cited the reasoning of like, you'll get another paycheck for it. But then when I went and suggested it and even found a date for it, the other person almost immediately started, that's actually a terrible idea. That's wrong. You would be sabotaging yourself. You have no idea what you're doing. Listen to someone who has more experience than you, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, like, you said this own advice to yourself not even like a few weeks ago. You're practically the planter of the seed, the progenitor of this idea, you know? And now all of a sudden, the moment I go to suggest it, or work with it, or implement it, suddenly it becomes a bad idea, some kind of self-sabotaging scheme or something like that. Well, the reason that the other person gave up on it the last time they talked about it was because, so basically how it boiled down was moving the date to the 12th. And the other person even said, if you can move it past the 12th, go as far as you can, and things like that. But moving it to the 12th, the thing is that they were going to have to then cancel what was set, basically cancel the account, and then essentially act as if it were day one rent again, set on the new day. But then we were going to have to, so basically the way they calculate the rent is that each day is like a set amount, and it all adds up to the total $880 at the end of the month. So basically, I guess the idea behind it is because of the way this place is that you could cancel at any time, so each day is calculating a certain amount of money. Just in case you had to leave, you would pay the amount that accumulated up to then, and then you would move on. And that would account for those days up to then before the actual due date itself. So that's basically what was going to happen, is that before, to move it to the 12th, we would pay the lot rent on the day, and then it would get canceled, and then we would have to pay the amount up to the 12th, which is the middle of the month, so it probably would have been like $400, about half, make it up to that day, and then we would be able to pay on the 12th, and then boom, that would be the new billing date. And then the other person, they got scared off by that and immediately gave up on the entire thing, even though it actually would have been a good idea, and just biting the bullet that once would have caused a lot of money to be saved. Not just my money, but especially their money. But anyway, so so today, this morning, I went up to the office and I went in and I was like, hey, can we switch to the 30th? But surprisingly, to my surprise, well, not too surprising, basically the way the person explained it to me is that and I do 100% believe them on this, it's whatever the computer does, that's what they have to work with, because the last time when I went about the 12th, the person wanted to do it right then and there, but then the computer kept giving them errors, so they figured out that solution to try as a way to try and get it to work. And that was the way that the computer was accepting. So today, I went expecting that, we'd have to bite the bullet at least once to switch it to the 30th, and then after that, all 4 of my paychecks would be able to cover the rent, and then the other person would only ever have to contribute $20 to the rent itself, and that's it. And so I went up there, and then both the person at the front and I were both waiting for the computer to be like, no, computing error, impossible, something like that. But then it turned out it worked with no extra cost. So now all my rent days have been set to the 30th of each month. The 30th of each month. Yeah. So, no muss, no fuss, no cost to us. It's all set for the 30th. And that means that from here on, that, now truly my whole paycheck is going to go into the rent. And it's only going to leave $20, about 20, sometimes 50 if I have to buy a cat litter bag to get covered by the other person currently. But, yeah, I get the feeling the other person made all kinds of comments in the past about how they feel threatened when someone else can pay for something. They see money and being able to pay for something more as a means for control and dominance and being the alpha and all that, So if your spending equals out to theirs or exceeds theirs, suddenly they feel inferior, or like you're like dominating them, or hierarchy play, stuff like that. So I get the feeling that some of that was involved, especially when I brought up the 30th and said hey, that's my whole paycheck. You only got to pay $20, and that was probably setting off oh no, you think you're going to spend more money on me. You'll think you're in control or whatever, that whole thing. That kind of thing. Just you're going to have to, you'll think you have power over me and you can boss me around and tell me what to do, that kind of thing. And it wasn't so, dealing with a somewhat childish reaction. And it wasn't until I finally was just I put in the memo with the front office to switch it to the 30th. The person at the front office was very amicable with me, was very, willing to work with me on essentially changing it to whatever day I need. So it is most likely, I didn't say it is most likely, I would expect for it to become the 30th by Monday. And it did. It has been. But yeah. But the moment, right after I said that, the other person immediately just was okay. And kind of became this childlike version of themselves. Yeah. Completely lost this sense of bravado they were trying to project. It's kind of like when a cat sticks up their back fur and kind of side hops at you trying to look bigger. And then you take one step forward and then they kind of go skittering and scattering or fall over and start meowing. It was kind of like that. That was irritating. It's irritating to realize when you're not with an adult. You're with someone who's an adult only by number, but really has no clue what they're doing or what they're talking about. They're just going by these impulses and these, whether this makes me feel strong, not what's good for the people around me or my family, or would be best for support. And the funny thing is that again, it's that thing where preaching endlessly about independent, creating the problem, leaving someone financially incapable of taking care of themselves, and then endlessly being why aren't you independent yet? You should be able to take care of everything by yourself. And then starts making up all these stories about that don't even really make sense, at all. They have no, conclude. She's I was at a place and I heard about a family who are all pitching in and they failed to make their deadline on the cost. And also, what if I died? And things like that. Just started coming up with all these I've met all kinds of families out here who they're all pitching in together and they failed to do it. Again, it's just this child. There's nothing else to it besides that. But again, it's that kind of attempt to demonize supporting each other and things like that, and it's really weak. It's really kind of lame. It doesn't make much sense, but you take it for what it literally is. It's just a person who doesn't want to deal with you anymore and will do literally and say literally anything to try and even if the person, they don't realize how lame and poor of an excuse it is and how it doesn't make any sense. They're just acting entirely and utterly off of impulses, and it's the most literal, straightforward thing they can think of to do. It would essentially be like someone coming up to you and saying, "You brushed your teeth? Well, I heard about these people who tried to brush their teeth and they still got gum disease." Or like they still got cavities, or something like that. I heard about these people who showered and they still got covered in dirt, God. Stuff like that. I heard about these people who took precaution, did this valid strategic thing that I don't like, but then they failed. I was like, all right. Really has nothing to do with anything. But anyway, back to the actual plan. Yeah. So that's the way things are going. That's the way things were going right now, and currently in that phase, wondering if the other person is going to try something to forcibly put me somewhere else, because unfortunately I don't have the capacity yet. I'm going to be $20 off, but I don't have the capacity yet to fully cover the rent. $20 off. And on those times where I have to get a bag of litter for the cats, it's going to be more like $40 off. But still no applications getting back to me. Still got no car, so all that's the same. Just more things I'm just worried about, being relocated. I think the threat of having someone forcibly placed into my home and all the baggage and complications that comes with that has been removed. That's passed. And so the main thing now is wondering if someone is concocting a plan to forcibly put me somewhere else, That's a whole mess. But, that's the course of things at the moment. I look forward to a day when there are certain things I won't have to worry about anymore. You get to worry about the normal things you get to worry about, like making sure you get to work on time, and have I made enough money for some groceries? Can I, how's the electric bill? Is my AC unit still working? Do I need to call a repairman? How long do I need to save up to pay for this thing? That kind of thing. But when it's like, there's another person out there who has a concerning amount of ability to be able to just try and toy with my ability to live, who is immediately, directly related to me in this and this place that I'm in right now, And they're actively working against my best interests. Solely for impulsive reasons, a very not particularly stable individual. And one day that worry will be gone, but then there will be, other worries. Like, where do I go to fill my propane tanks? Where do I throw out my trash? Do I have enough money for groceries? But I think that would probably be better Another pressing one is how do I go anywhere? There is literally not enough money for me to afford a car. But, I'm thinking about asking about getting rides, carpooling essentially. You could call it that. Carpooling. Yeah. All kinds of things to think about. But today, yeah, and tying that back into the events of today, I didn't send off more job applications because I haven't found any. I've sent the ones I could send, essentially. And that's that. And I've sent inquiries to places about, rent prices and stuff like that. Basically, trying to get ahead of the curve of wherever the other person might try to impulsively send me off to, and try and kind of catch it ahead of time. Just checking with the pricing. And before I get stuck somewhere without a second thought, only to realize all the complications that come with it that weren't thought of, and then everything just turns into a mess, Looking out for my own safety in that way. But today I did update my portfolio a bit, updated it with that soundtrack that I did, and just put in some work to some housekeeping, get some cognitive load off my mind. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else besides that in terms of what my week has been like. Pretty slow day on Memorial Day, that's for sure. Not a whole lot of people came in. Most people were out by lunchtime, just doing skeleton crew type stuff for whoever else came in. And a lot of good meals had. Kept me sated enough to not use up any of the food I had at home, so I'm actually ahead quite a bit when it comes to saving up food. Haven't needed to have groceries delivered for over 3 weeks now, so no money has been spent for about 4 weeks on me for groceries. I saved a lot of money that way. I'm very good at keeping things long-lasting and cutting things down to the most efficient, most essential. Yeah. But you know what I'm thankful for? I'm thankful that I managed to avoid a whole lot of... actually, I'll talk about that in a second. I'll make another recording after this to talk about that. But you know what? I'm grateful that I managed to avoid a lot of logical, mental, emotional, metaphorical, and in all other ways existential traps that were set for me. Managed to push through, come out stronger, and come out a little more experienced and a little more wizened. Got my rent date changed. Even asked some questions at work about how some of my coworkers go about doing things. It's funny, one of my coworkers, there's like a whole family lineage that works at my job, and you know what? With the current climate, the way finances and money is going, there's an entire family that just all lives at the same home in their own rooms. And you know what? They go do their jobs, they go out do their things, they come back home, and they all support each other on paying for things. And they are an incredibly successful model of a family getting together. Of a family getting together and working together to financially support a home. They're not threatened by each other pitching in. Anywho, yeah. They all support each other and help each other to grow and things like that. I don't want that with the other person. The thing is that they are also all very endeared and loving towards each other, and they treat each other very well, and they are good to each other. Very much so. They're snippy with each other. You know, there's a shared personality trait where they're very sassy, snippy, even playfully aggravated with each other, come up with all kinds of like teasing and things like that, or just like playing up being sassy, no nonsense, that kind of thing. But you know what? I can tell they genuinely care about each other. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Even I will. Yeah. Just person I never want to live with ever again. It's painful as it is just being in the same car as them for 30 minutes. Twice. So let's see, 30 minutes. 2 hours every weekend is painful enough. I never want to live with them again. Ever. It would have been torture. So even this precarious situation, the way it is, you know what? I'm grateful because it's favorable and preferable to, you know, what the alternative is. Yeah. So I'm going to stop this recording here. And then I'm going to start another one so that those nice things that I want to talk about don't get buried under all of these things, you know? So, see you once more in just a second.